Chapter 1. Calys. My breasts hurt. The pain was similar to having a pair of sore giant lumps connected to my body. The pain reminded me of something I tended to forget. I may have been raised with panthers, but I wasn't one. I was human and I could die of breast cancer. But the pain's all worth it, I told myself valiantly. Tonight was proof of it. My aching breasts, the result of an opponent's hard jab to my chest, were also proof of it. I was in the Denver. I had made it to the strongest fighting class. And because of that, I finally had the chance to pick my future partner from the cream of the crop. Black Mamba, my first opponent, had potential. He had an 8-pack, a must for me. I was also an expert when it came to guesstimating body mass indexes. And just by looking at Black Mamba, I knew he was at 24.4. That meant only a little over 1/5 of his body was made of fat. Not bad at all, although he really could have gotten that down to 23. A couple more push-ups each day would have done the trick. Rare Bear was good too. His skills in taekwondo were amazing, but there was something strange with the way he fought. He always had his pinky finger turned up like a queen holding a teacup. Could that mean anything? I continued mentally scoring potential consorts as I hurried down another tunnel. If all roads led to Rome, all tunnels under Naples, Florida led to the Denver. The tunnels were dark and narrow. Lights were only installed in the intersections. They were sparsely decorated with plain wooden tables and chairs, and they served as waiting areas for fighters without dressing rooms. Behind me, the shouts of the crowd were still loud. Bite his neck. Break his claws. The den was the only one of its kind in the States, an underground fighting arena for shifters. Night after night, huge crowds turned out to watch the fights. To make battles more exciting, special chemicals had been injected in the air. These chemicals had the power to neutralize the extraordinary senses of shifters. As a result, wolves no longer had the best sense of smell and bird shifters no longer had the best sense of hearing. Everyone was basically equal, and because of that, only brute strength and tactics could win the battle. My breasts ached more painfully with every minute that passed. Since I was the best in my previous fighting class, the den had given me a dressing room, but that was still 5 intersections down, and I didn't think I could make it that far. I had to do something before I went crazy and cut off my own breasts. Turning right, I took a detour. In minutes I came to an empty intersection and nearly expired with joy at the sight of it. I hurried to the corner and took off my loose shirt and overalls. My choice of costume was strategic. Leatherface's clothes were big enough to hide the fact that I was, well, a girl. Under my costume, I wore a tank top and a skimpy pair of black nylon shorts. Pulled my top up and unwrapped the layers of cotton bindings around my chest. Aya! Tears actually formed in my eyes as my breast bounced free of its restraints. Note to self. Make an appointment with a doctor ASAP. I knew how to do things. Hot wiring a car was easy. Saving a choking stranger with the Heimlich maneuver was easy. But girly stuff like finding out if I had breast cancer? Could vaguely remember watching an infomercial that said I had to touch myself to find out if I had breast cancer. But the why or how of it? Not one clue. The pain in my breasts reminded me of my unwanted task. With a grimace, I started groping my breasts. They were bigger than I was comfortable with, so there was a lot to grope. I really wanted to have them reduced. Panthers outside my pack tended to think just because I had big breasts I was stupid. Worse, they also thought the bigger a woman's breasts were, the smaller her brain was. I just couldn't understand them. It wasn't like breasts took up space inside my head. The damp air inside the tunnels made my nipples pucker up. It was embarrassing, and I felt my cheeks heating up at the sight of it. I really wish I was born a man instead, I thought glumly as I continued touching my breasts. The weight of my breasts in my own hands was also embarrassing. Maybe it was time to seriously consider breast reduction surgery. Maybe. Do you need some help with that? With a gasp I whirled around, shocked at the voice. I should have heard someone approaching, but I had let down my guard, being too busy worrying about breast cancer. The intruder was a tall masked man clad entirely in black. He had dark hair and green eyes. I recognized him instantly. He was the masked wolf. He was the den's one fighter. And I was his one fan, but he didn't have to know that. For a moment I could only gape. The masked wolf. The masked wolf. The masked wolf. Growing up, I had never been interested in boys. I had always thought of myself as one of them, only we had different body parts. But then I saw the masked wolf fight, and I totally fell in love. Just by looking at his body, calculating his weight and height, I just knew he had the perfect body mass index. And oh, the way he fought inside the cage. It was poetry in motion, art, painted in blood. The groans and moans of pain from his defeated foes were like hymns to the deadly beauty of his moves. But most impressively of all, he was honorable. The way he conducted himself inside the cage, the way he never baited those weaker than him, the way he always gave the bullies the comeuppance they so deserved. He was my superhero, and right now my superhero was staring at my naked breasts. Crap. I quickly covered my breasts at the realization. For the first time in my life, I wished I had longer hair. Really, really long hair, the kind that could cover my breasts completely. Or maybe I could be a mermaid and have one of those shell-made bras. He was still staring. The fierce look glittering in his eyes, which were a stunning shade of green, made me feel like he could see through my hands. Made me turn pink all over. Stop staring. Just saying the words made me feel more embarrassed. God, what did he think of me now? I had secretly fantasized about the two of us meeting inside the cage. I had secretly dreamed that he would be so bowled over by my fighting skills that when he realized I was soon to be a pack leader, he would fall down on one knee and declare himself my devoted cavalier. But considering I was half naked right now, I had a feeling all he'd want to do was double over in laughter. Or stare. Which he was still doing now. I hugged myself more tightly in reaction, wishing there was something I could do to control my body's reaction to him. My nipples had prickled in awareness at his unswerving gaze. Please stop. It's impossible not to stare, my beauty. You have the most amazing looking breasts. The word should have sounded like the worst pickup line, but when he said it so matter-of-factly, I just couldn't help but feel beautiful and sexy. I have never felt that way either before. Why were you touching yourself in such a public place? It's not what you think, I mumbled. A sexy, cocky smile touched his lips as he asked wickedly. It wasn't. For a moment all I could do was stare. Was the masked wolf actually flirting with me? Seeing that he was still waiting for an answer, I said lamely, they hurt. Unbidden, my gaze strayed to my costume on the floor. Realizing my mistake, I looked back at him quickly, but it was too late. His gaze had followed mine. When he looked back at me, the recognition in his eyes had me biting my lip in dismay. Crap. My cover was busted. When he spoke, I expected him to say something lewd, but instead his voice was quiet as he said, I caught the last few minutes of your fight earlier. I saw where he hit you. He took a step towards me. Don't come closer. The words burst out of my mouth, but he didn't stop walking. The closer he got, the more panicky I felt. The tunnel suddenly felt claustrophobic. Just the thought of his proximity had me forgetting all my years of warrior training. It made my mouth dry and my body tingle all over. I wanted to take a step back with every step he took forward. But I stood my ground. I didn't want him to think I was afraid. Oh crap. He was just a step away from me now. Warrior pride be damned. Turned around and tried to run away. Not so fast. His chuckle was husky. His voice a velvety murmur tinged with amusement as he caught my wrist. He spun me around to face me. In another second he had pushed me back against the wall. He put my arms over my head, just as his hard body pressed against mine. This was not my first time to have a man's body next to mine. I had been raised as a warrior. I was used to having a man's body on top of me, under me, next to me. Men's bodies and mine tangled in all kinds of positions during battle practice. But this was different somehow. With him so close, the heat of his body making my own body burn, my whole world compressed into one single thing, him. The fact that I was in the den didn't seem to matter anymore. The fact that this was a public place, that I was half naked, none of it mattered. When I looked up at him, I saw that he was staring at my breasts. Again. Should be mad. But I wasn't. If I had to be honest, I was turned on. It was the strangest feeling, something I had never experienced before. But I wasn't so innocent. The first didn't recognize the feelings of lust that had taken over my body. The men I trained with talked about it all the time. They would say how the urge to have sex could be so uncontrollable, all thoughts of common sense were thrown out of the window, that the thought of it was enough to make them gasp, to make them groan, to make them ache. When the masked wolf bent his head, I didn't even think of resisting. To deny one's feelings would be to lie, and warriors never lied. A whimper escaped me. When I felt him sniffing my neck, I could feel his lips forming a smile against my skin at the sound of my whimper. His smile oozed of sexiness and cockiness. It embarrassed me, but it turned me on even more. You're human. As he spoke, his hot breath tickled my skin, making my nipples harden. My body's reaction had me biting my lip. This close, I knew he would feel my nipples pricking his chest. I'd never have thought little Leatherface would be human. My heart leapt at hearing him say the name I used while fighting. He really did recognize me. And you're a woman. He murmured the words as if marveling the fact. You intrigue me very much, my beauty. There are a lot of questions I want to ask. But right now all I can think about is how beautiful your body is. And how sensitive. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was a sensual purr. Does that mean you want me very badly? When he lifted his head to look at me, I immediately twisted my head away to avoid his gaze. If he looked into my eyes, he'd have the mortifying answer to his question. I did want him badly. Look at me, little kitty. The seductive invitation in those words was irresistible. The endearment was just as hypnotizing. It made me want to curl and rub my body against him just like a little kitty. I'm not your little kitty. I said the words even as I found myself following his command. It was a pathetic comeback, I know, but it was all I had. Oh, but you are, he countered silkily. You may not want to admit it, but your body knows the truth. As if proving his words, he traced my lips with his own, and just like that, my body jerked as if lightning had struck it. Such a simple soft touch, and yet I felt like I had been burned. Passionate and fierce. I could feel his smile turning possessive. Definitely a girl after my own cock. The way he had twisted the simple phrase and made it sound so wicked had me choking. How could he so easily say something like that? My surprise had his lips twitching slightly. You amaze me. I could tell he meant it. He pushed closer towards me, his head bending close again. You're a mass of contradictions. His whisper tickled my ears. Goosebumps popped all over my skin, and it was all I could do not to shiver. Do you know I loved watching you fight? Why, you do. The words came out as a gasp. It was hard not to when he was whispering his words into my ear and making my body melt as he did. I admired the way you didn't let your size handicap you, but instead used it to your own advantage. Of course, now that I know your little Leatherface, I don't know if I approve of you fighting. It isn't for you to approve. I cut him off stiffly. He only smiled in response before saying huskily, but I have to admit, little kitty, now that I know it was you fighting, I find your skills in the cage damn hot. The words had me starting in surprise, causing my body to press against him, my nipples brushing against his chest. I would never have expected him to say something like that. Most shifters were chauvinistic to the core. I had honestly expected the masked wolf to be that way. I would have even forgiven him if he had undermined my skills. He was a shifter after all. He was born chauvinistic. But instead, the masked wolf had openly admitted he admired the way I fought. Maybe he was my superhero after all. When I looked up intending to thank him, I realized he was staring at my breasts again. Oh crap. How the heck had I forgotten I was still half naked in his arms? And what the heck did I have to do to make my nipples behave? They were so proudly erect, it was as if they were begging to be touched. By the time the masked wolf's gaze returned to my face, I was a bag of nerves. And I wetted my lips. You shouldn't have done that. It was my only warning. My mouth parted in surprise at his cryptic words. What did I? His lips closed over mine. Ah, the masked wolf was kissing me. His tongue sliding into my mouth had me gasping. Every sense I possessed came alive as he kissed me more deeply. Even as all my inhibitions tried to hold me back, it was impossible to resist the lure of his kiss. This kiss felt like it was meant to be mine alone. This kiss felt like it could only be beautiful because he was kissing me. So tell me, how could I resist that? How could I not have my tongue tangle with his shyly at the beginning, then more boldly when I heard him groan in pleasure at the contact? How could I keep my body from writhing with each kiss, my breasts rubbing against him, my nipples turning harder and harder? He pulled away with a rough expletive. He was breathing hard, and I tried to catch my breath even as confusion filled me. What now? The masked wolf looked down at me with green eyes that glittered with passion and possessiveness. I had never been on the receiving end of such a look. Normally, when men looked at me with passion, it was because they wanted to kill me. Tell me why you're fighting here. I had heard the masked wolf speak when he was being interviewed after winning a fight. He had a dulcet and languid way of speaking. He spoke like how I imagined a prince would speak. But the way he spoke now was different. His words were clipped, his tone harsh. He spoke like an alpha used to command. I was an alpha myself, but there was something about his voice that made me want to submit. It was as if he was my alpha, the only alpha who could command me. And so I spoke the truth. I am looking for a cap. Chapter 3. When I was 4 years old, I came upon a hunter while playing in the forest. He had been the first human I had met. He had been on his knees mutilating a deer while it was still alive. The last thing I remembered was the excruciating pain shining in the deer's eyes. Everything else was shrouded in blackness. When I woke up, the hunter was dead, mutilated in the same way the deer was. 3 more memories would be forever lost to me by the time people finally realized what was going on. In all those instances, I remembered seeing something bad and passing out after. And when I woke up, the only clues I'd have to those missing minutes of my life would be the dead bodies around me. The worst of those incidents happened when I was 7. My father had thrown a party to celebrate my birthday. One of the guests' younger sons had tried to rape one of our house servants. I never saw the boy again after that day. A part of me was not surprised when I heard the knock on the door and then my father coming in. I sat up on my bed as he sat next to me. "How you doing, cub?" His voice was gruff. I could tell he was still worried about the older boy that went missing in the party. "I'm sorry, Papa." I looked down at my clenched fists. I was trying very hard not to cry. It was my fault all those men were angry at Papa. I wished I could tell them where the boy went. I knew a part of me would know where that boy was, but I just couldn't remember. "You did nothing wrong." I looked up at his harsh words. "But Papa." He shook his head. "Listen to me. Have you ever known me to lie?" "No, Papa." "Then you know I am telling you the truth when I tell you that you have done nothing wrong." My heart eased at his words. Warriors never lied, and since Papa was the greatest warrior of all, then it must be true. I had done nothing wrong. My father cleared his throat. "I have something for you." My eyes widened when I saw Stefano's prize comics in his hands. "Do you know what these are?" I nodded. "Stefano's comics. They're about superheroes." "Sometimes, Stefano let me read them when I wasn't being stubborn." Whatever that meant. "I want you to read them too." "Why?" "Because their stories are just like yours." My eyes widened at Papa's answer. "They are." I glanced down at the comics he gave me, which were new and still covered in plastic. I realized then these weren't actually Stefano's. Papa had really bought them for me. Thinking about his words, I asked slowly, "Are they also adopted?" Was that what he meant? "Well, some of them are, but that's not the point. You see, Cub, they are all different like you. Unique. They had powers, abilities that no one could understand. Even they didn't understand their own powers at the start. So when people saw them using their powers, the people told them to stop." I remembered the boy's mother screaming at me. She had told me to stop. She had called me a monster. They thought I would. I shook my head, confused. They thought the superheroes might hurt them. But they were wrong. Papa's voice was vehement. "The superheroes you read about in these comics, they don't care what those other people say. All they want is to make the world a better place, and they sometimes need to use their powers to do that." My father paused. Then he looked at me and said in a serious voice, "You are like them, Calys. You make the world a safer, happier, and better place for everyone. But your powers are very strong too. So before you can help others, you need to learn how to control your powers. You need to do everything you can first without." Papa stressed the last word. "Your powers. Why can't I just help them with my powers?" "Because people are terrified of them. You can't help other people if they're terrified of you." I shook my head. "Even if I don't use my powers, Papa, they are already scared of me." I remembered how Papa's guests had looked at me when they realized the boy had gone missing. They were all scared of me. It took a long time for Papa to answer. "They just don't understand you, Calys. That's all." But you cannot let it stop you from helping others, and you cannot let what they think of you make you believe you are doing something wrong. I'll try, Papa. I said the words because I knew it was what my father wanted to hear. But warriors didn't lie. And so I added sadly, but Papa, I'm worried. What if they will always be afraid of me? Not everyone will be afraid of you, Cub. And you know why? Because there are other people like you. Like me. Yes. Other kids who are also like superheroes. And they will be your friends. Your best friends. They will never be afraid of you. Ever. Someone who wasn't afraid of me. Only Papa, my sister, and Stefano weren't afraid of me. But they were different. They were family. But if I found another superhero, then I would finally have my first friend. Someone who would not be afraid of me. Even during the times when I was afraid of myself. Stefano was the first one to describe my incidents as dark fits. He was 12 when he invented the term, and back then he was very much into Stephen King. He said one of the author's characters had a darker half who did bad things. Mine did bad things too, but to bad people. As time went by, I became more aware of what was happening when I had one of my dark fits. But awareness was all I could achieve, and even now, controlling what I did during my dark fits was beyond me. Stop. The word was spoken in a coolly commanding voice. It was the first time my darker half had heard a voice addressing her without fear. She looked at the person who spoke the word and was instantly besieged by emotions, so many of them, and none of them she had ever experienced. Concern, courage, and strangely anger. But not directed at her. It was rather for her. All the emotions lent power to that one word, stop. And so my darker half stopped. In the middle of breaking the arm of one of the hyenas, she stopped by throwing him against the wall. He groaned as he fell to the floor. She ignored the sound, turning slowly instead towards the man who had dared to tell her to stop. The masked wolf walked past my darker half, and she watched his every move. Sensed her amazement as he resumed the fight, not breaking a sweat as he methodically demolished those who stood against him. Strange, strong, beautiful. Those were her last thoughts as she faded back into me. She slept. I woke and knew that I had found him. My superhero. Chapter 5. Smile, Cub. The command was issued with a smile of his own by my father, Veneto Adelardi. My lips quickly stretched into a smile. There were many reasons to smile, really, but all I wanted was to mope. The drive home last night had been completely spent just thinking about Alejandro Moretti, and it was the same. When I got home, I had tossed and turned in my bed wondering why I should care so much about a man who clearly didn't take his duties to his pack seriously. He had everything needed to be a superhero, and yet he had turned his back on his responsibilities. It was a glorious day, the sky a clear blue, and the surrounding pine trees lent a fragrant scent to the air. But for once in my life I failed to take pleasure from the land I loved and had been raised to protect. I looked up absently, but the bright morning sun had me silently groaning and looking away again. My head hurt. It was as if thinking so hard about the werewolf had given me a hangover. I hated how obsessed I was about him. So he kissed beautifully and made my body hum with such pleasure it was as if I had been born to moan his name. It didn't mean no other man could do it, right? So he looked at me like no other man had ever looked, as if I was desirable, and not the human monster that everyone feared. It didn't mean no other man could like me the way I was, right? In fact, that was what this morning's auction was all about. My pack possessed genetic ties to the near-extinct species of Florida panthers. Adelardi. Shifters could command them by will, and they could transfer the command to another person, even a human. For the first time in history, my pack was auctioning some of our baby panthers. It was bait, pure and simple, to get the most eligible shifters to come into our territory. Are you mad at me? Veneto asked as he continued to smile at the guests we had milling about, checking the panthers that were prowling about, their fur coats sleek and shiny, their eyes flashing with alert intelligence. My smile also in place, I answered. Of course not, Father. I wasn't. I was just not as resigned as I should be to having my choice of consort taken away from me like this. One of the panthers had reached my side, rubbing his head against my thigh. I bent down, obliging its demand for attention by stroking its back. Shifters in front of me gaped. I pretended not to notice. I couldn't blame them. An idiotic guest had tried petting one of the panthers earlier and ended up in our medical center to get stitched. Shifters healed very quickly in general, but not when bitten by one of our cats. He was lucky it had been a cub. A full-grown panther would have cut off his arm completely. My father said under his breath, I would have postponed this if I could, but we're running out of time. Last night was your last chance to hunt. I choked. You make me sound like a cougar. Veneto snorted. I'm not. I'd be doing them an injustice if I did. I made a face. Very funny, father. Instead of answering, he simply looked at me closely, his bushy brows coming together in a frown. Veneto was a solidly built man and one of the most respected and feared pack leaders of the Panthera. He didn't talk much, but he was mighty observant. I kept my face expressionless, not wanting him to guess my thoughts. Finally he said, You have not yet told me about why you always come home with bruises. I told you to find a man worthy of being your consort, not your sparring partner. An image of Alejandro Moretti flashed through my mind. He would make a worthy sparring partner and an interesting consort. As soon as the thought occurred to me, I pushed it away. There was no point thinking about him. He hadn't even asked how we would meet again. The world of shifters might be small, but not so small that he would easily find out which pack I belonged to. Clearly I had only been a momentary diversion to Alejandro Moretti. It was only to be expected from the most licentious wolf in history. I just wish I didn't have to choose at all. It was the most selfish thing I had ever said, but I had to say it. Warriors didn't lie, and I needed to voice my true feelings even just this once. You know I can lead the pack on my own, father. You know. He answered wearily. Your abilities have never been the issue. You know that, too, daughter. I've raised you myself, trained you myself. You're 100 times more a warrior than my greedy nephew could be. I know better than anyone that you can be the future alpha of my pack, and each and every panther in our pack would gladly follow your command and die to protect you. But I'm human. But you're human. It always boiled down to that. The Panthera would never allow a human to lead one of the packs. You need a natural-born shifter as consort, or at the very least a cavalier to rule at your side. If I let you lead the pack on your own, it will only serve as a temptation for every panther to challenge your authority and win leadership from you. I can handle the challenges. You can. But what about the rest of your pack? Each challenge means war, and every war has casualties. Stefano will not always be with us, he finished gently. He has his own pack. He will eventually return to them. No shifter can ever turn his back on his birthright. A sigh emerged from Veneto. I am old, Calys, and I am tired. The words had me stiffening. I hated it when I was reminded of his age. Even though his shifter blood allowed him to look decades younger, the truth was, Veneto was close to being a century old now. He had been my rock, and I couldn't imagine life without him. If choosing a cavalier today could make a difference, if it could ease his worries and prolong his life, then so be it. I bowed to him. I beg your leave, father. I will start circulating and look for potential consorts. Make sure Stefano is with you at all times. Yes, father. When I straightened, I saw that a grave look had fallen on Veneto's face. I'm sorry for placing pressure on your shoulders, but we simply have no choice. War is upon us, cub. I cannot be at peace until I'm assured you are not alone in defending our pack. He nodded towards the other shifters. Be quick in choosing, Calys. The words he left unsaid hung in the air. I did have to make my choice quickly if I did not want the conclave making the choice for me. Chapter 6. Alejandro, I would like to ask you to draft a contract that frees me to be cavalier to a pack princess of the Panthera. The word should have come as a shock to the heir of the Moretti pack, but when Domenico Moretti looked up from the documents he was quietly perusing, his handsome face was unreadable. His tone was just as bland as he said, Please take a seat. Everyone who knew him, however, would also understand that the words were not a request but a command. When his younger brother was seated, Domenico asked, Why is there a need for a cavalier? It appears that her father is on a husband-hunting mission for her. Alejandro cracked his knuckles as he spoke the words. It did not sit well with him that his little kitty might be given to another man. Domenico studied the play of emotions on his brother's face with interest. May I ask which pack princess is this? Wordlessly, Alejandro pushed forward the invitation he had wrangled from. Another pack princess, this one the stunning and worldly eldest daughter of the pack of the Garridos. She had been the only Lycan he knew who had been invited to tomorrow's auction, and that invitation was vital since panthers were notorious for being distrustful of strangers. One eyebrow arched questioningly as Domenico read the invitation. They must need to have her mated as soon as possible. Those panthers are famous all over the world. I can see a lot of pack leaders' sons hurrying to attend this event. He paused. Do you plan to be her cavalier just for the sake of owning one of those panthers? Alejandro said idly. Would it be hard to believe if I said yes? Those panthers, as you say, are world famous. Domenico wasn't fooled. His younger brother might insist on making others see him as nothing but a carefree playboy prince, but he knew all of his siblings well. With this brother of his, the charming sophisticated facade he presented was just that, a facade. If you become the Princess Cavalier, you will need to spend a lot of time with those panthers. They are not exactly friendly with strangers. You will need to bear a lot of prejudice there. A pair of ocean blue eyes flashed in Alejandro's mind as he questioned his decision. The memory of the taste of his kitty's lips and the feel of her body had kept him awake and aching the entire night, so much so that in the end he had found himself masturbating and pleasuring himself in the shower, something he had not done since he was a boy. When his younger brother only shrugged, Domenico remarked casually, You know, my first thought was that this would be more to your twins' liking, as we all know Alessandro's been rather aggressive. That would make him feel right at home there. No fucking way, Alejandro thought blackly. Only when Domenico started talking about panthers and his twin in the same sentence did Alejandro remember one important thought. He had an identical twin and he did not like to think about what could happen if his little kitty realized the same thing. Would she want Alessandro more? Perhaps. She seemed to be the type of woman who was all for grand gestures, and what was grander than one Lycan prince fighting a dozen other shifters, all for the glory of defending their packs. Reputation? Alessandro would not make a good cavalier for her. She's already too passionate. He's too hot-headed, especially when you consider he's a college professor. Domenico smiled but said evenly, As you are too charming for a paid fighter. Alejandro stiffened. So Domenico knew of his nocturnal activities then. He waited for his brother to ask about it, but no question was forthcoming. Nonetheless, I'm thinking about whether Alessandro should accompany you to this party. What do you think? Domenico asked, even though he really had no plans of having both twins attend the party. He only wanted to push his younger brother into revealing his thoughts. Alejandro worried him in a way Alessandro didn't. This brother of his kept too much to himself even as he continued to charm everyone with his lazy wit and courteous ways. Whatever the pack leader's heir decides, Alejandro said. The words were spoken in a dulcet tone, but the muscle ticking in Alejandro's jaw gave Domenico hope that all was not lost. Pride had lost him the woman he loved, and he was determined that none of his younger brothers would follow in his footsteps. In Alejandro's case, it appeared that the fate of his heart lay in the hands of a panther princess. Domenico took careful note of the princess name even as he kept silent. Would be healthy to let Alejandro sweat it out a bit. Calys Adelardi. He must find out everything about her and ensure that she was the ideal woman for Alejandro. Calys. Selflessness came in many forms, and not every warrior's deed had to be dipped in blood. It was like what the Dark Knight said when he had decided to give up his cape, that a hero could be anyone. Stefano Gitticelli, tall, blonde, and blue-eyed like a real-life prince charming, came to stand in front of me. Princess. As he bowed, he not so gently stepped on my foot, saying under his breath, Stop daydreaming. I blinked rapidly in pain even though I badly tried to look as if I was flirting with my father's right-hand man. I wanted to yelp in pain but I didn't. A true warrior always suffered in silence. When he straightened I mumbled, I'm sorry. I had been daydreaming for the last couple of minutes. My eyes had started to glaze the moment the men started talking about going to beach parties and attending some event that sounded like a cross between a Coach and Cinderella. I just couldn't believe the future pack leaders of the Panther were so shallow. Didn't they know that war was at our doorsteps? This very moment? As Stefano came to stand behind me, he murmured glacially, "You need to focus on sizing each and every eligible shifter that comes your way. One of them could potentially be leading your pack with you or for you. The future of your pack hinges on your choice of consort. Is that matter so boring to you?" Stefano's words had me paling. I'm sorry. God, what was wrong with me? I used to consider finding a consort an honorable task. I had looked forward to the opportunity to serve my pack. All I had been able to think back then was what I would gain for the Adelardi pack. But after last night, after Alejandro Moretti, now I was starting to think of what I could lose. Crap. This had to stop. Pushing the thought away, I straightened up and pinned another smile on my face. Elijah. The Panthers, I called, immediately came to my side, stretching by my feet lazily before looking around them with disdain. I could empathize. All three of us were for show, but we had to do what we had to do for our pack. A crowd of guests immediately surrounded us. The questions started coming in, and I answered them pleasantly while I calculated each shifter's BMI. Sadly, not one of them rated below overweight. What kind of warrior training did these princes have? Did it take place next to the bed and the refrigerator? It was nearing noon when Stefano spoke again. "Princess." I jumped at his voice. Crap. Had he seen my eyes glazing when the prince kept droning on and on about taking a selfie with my panthers? A selfie? He was a warrior, and he wanted a selfie. Would you like to take a walk while the panthers are given water? I breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, Stefano was allowing me to have a break from princess duties. Yes, please. Stefano bowed to the crowd of disappointed guests in front of us, murmuring our excuses. I listened to him with admiration. Both of us had the same tutors, the same training, the same everything. But why was it he had mastered the art of smooth talking and I couldn't? Stefano walked beside me, a right he had earned as an honorary member of our family. My thoughts turned to Alejandro Moretti once more. I didn't want to think about him, but I couldn't help it. If only he truly meant to be my cavalier, I thought wistfully. It would have been ideal, and it had nothing to do with the fact that the Lichen Prince happened to be very attractive and an absolutely great kisser. Absolutely not. Stuff like that was just like icing on the cake. Yes, icing. Deliciously hot and sweet icing, with the way his lips so expertly claimed my own, with the way his large strong hands shaped my body as if it was a toy to be molded to his will, and oh, with the way he could make my nipples. Princess, you seem like you are about to drool. Stefano's puzzled observation had my eyes flying open. Crap. I was about to drool. But before I could think of an excuse, someone called out to us. If it isn't the human monster and the bastard. It was a group of young cubs, and the leader of the group had an insolent look on his face as he sauntered towards us. Take it back, I said coldly. Princess, Stefano said warningly. I didn't heed it. Stefano never liked it when we made a fuss over him, but he was family, and anyone who thought he could be insulted because he was a bastard did not deserve to be treated with respect. What are you going to do if I don't? The leader jeered. I knew his kind. He had heard stories about me and thought he would claim his manhood by beating me, the human monster. If he had only insulted me, I might have allowed him to leave without harm. But he had insulted someone under our pack's protection and without provocation at all. He had to be shown the error of his ways. Apologize if you know what is good for you. And I keep asking you, bitch. What ya gonna do if I don't? Flutter your eyelashes at me and kill me with a look. His friends snickered at his words, and it made him puff his chest out like a peacock. He turned to Stefano. And then there's you. You've got a nice and cozy setup here, don't you? Thrown out by the jaguars, but like any greedy bastard, you managed to claw a spot for yourself with the panthers. Probably want to marry her yourself, don't you? Match made in hell. More snickers. He was really getting on my nerves. You must learn to control yourself, princess. I knew Stefano was right. Sadly, this cub's attitude wasn't any different from the rest of the other panthers. Panthers in general were racist and uncivilized. If you weren't a panther, then you didn't amount to anything. Or at least for now. It was my calling to change that. I knew in my heart I was destined to reshape the future of the panthers. And I could start right now. Struggling to control my temper, I said, "There are certain rules we must abide, Panther. One is to respect the owner of the house and its guests." "Fuck you." Then he looked at Stefano and spit. Stefano's curse was the last thing I heard before I went dark. When I looked up, I no longer existed. My darker half said in a silky voice, "That was a bad thing you did, little boy." Silence fell at her words. When my darker half woke, she made everything just a little darker all around her. You could feel her power thrumming in the air. And it wasn't the kind that reassured you. It was the kind that scared the crap out of you, and the poor cubs that thought to mess with me were scared. One of the cubs tried to make a run for it. In the blink of an eye, my darker half had blocked his way, moving as fast as any shifter, and with a beautiful smile on her face, she aimed for his knee. There was the sound of bones cracking, followed by his scream of pain before he crumpled to the ground. In another blink, she was back at Stefano's side, facing the other cubs. They weren't scared now. They were about to be terrified. Unfortunately for them, they had good cause, since right now my darker half was in a bad mood. The kind that wanted blood spilled and lives taken. She raised her arm. "Don't even try to escape or it will be worse." Crap. She was going to kill all of them. I willed myself back in control, but it was impossible. There seemed to be an invisible wall separating the two of us, and there was no way around it. When my darker half prepared to strike, I screamed. My eyes closed. Involuntarily, unwilling to witness the slaughter of innocent lives even as I screamed and tried everything in my power to wrestle back control of my body. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was Alejandro Moretti. The sun shone behind him, making him look like an avenging angel. I shared a moment of confusion with my darker half. Why was he here? And why was he wearing a suit? "Easy now, little kitty," he told my darker half softly. I marveled at the sheer absence of fear in his voice and the clarity of his gaze as he looked at her. Even Stefano had an impossible time controlling my darker half when she was this pissed, but somehow there was something about Alejandro Moretti that seemed to make her listen like a beast that knew its master. She cocked her head to the side. "Why do you call us this?" Her words stunned Alejandro. Even Stefano became more alert. Heck, even I myself was shocked. She had never referred to me in any way in the past. The air vibrated with even greater tension as she waited for his answer. Leaves ruffled above us, and even the ground seemed to respond to her, like it was only waiting for her command to break apart. But Alejandro appeared oblivious, a mysterious smile playing on his lips as he answered, "Because you look like one to me. A little kitty." His smile widened, ever so slightly. "My little kitty." I heard everyone drawing their breath as he took a step towards her, calm as you please, like he wasn't about to get close to a hungry predator. In many ways that was what my darker half was. "As my little kitty," he continued in a seductively persuasive voice, "you should let me, your cavalier, do the fighting for you." The sound of a needle falling could have been heard at the silence his words caused. My heart was beating so fast now, and my body felt restless and incomplete at his words. I couldn't believe he had really said that out loud. My darker half considered him with a thoughtful expression. Finally she spoke. "You would make them pay?" Solemnly he said. "Yes." "You will show them the error of their ways?" "Yes." "Then fight." A pause. "I want all of them unconscious, Wolf. I will be displeased if any one of them can remember his name when you are done." The leader of the cubs actually started to cry. But all Alejandro said was, "Your wish is my command, little kitty." Chapter 8. "Alejandro, you can't be serious." He spoke the words tightly as he swiftly put on his clothes. His little kitty was doing the same, and for a moment he imagined that those naked curves were being caressed by another pair of hands. His blood went cold with rage. "No fucking way." Calys turned to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He cursed at the sight of it. She was obviously hurting, and she was just as obvious in her desire not to show her pain. With another muttered curse, he turned away and pulled his shirt over his head. He couldn't risk looking at her any longer. The longer he looked, the more tempted he would be to change his mind about being her consort. Consort. That was just another term for husband in their world, just one step away from being a mate. Had he really thought she was just fooling around when she told him she would only go to bed with him if he were to agree to be her consort? The question made Alejandro uncomfortable. Guilt started to stir inside him, but he ignored it. Even if he had subconsciously known she meant the words he had not taken her virginity, she was still pure, a worthy bride for any pack leader's heir. Not that she needed to be anyone's bride. He was her cavalier. She didn't need anyone else to be by her side while she had him. Unfortunately, he had to make her see things his way first. Not exactly an easy task, Alejandro considered as he looked back at Calys, who was now fully dressed and still obviously hurting. I didn't mean to hurt you. Frustration made him say the words. He had the strongest urge to haul her into his arms. Even though he had been the one to hurt his little kitty, Alejandro knew instinctively that he was the only one who could heal her as well. She answered with a brief smile, one that didn't reach her eyes either. He wanted to curse again. She was so damn open with her emotions. Alejandro remembered her words. Warriors didn't lie. God, she was so damn naive. How could she believe something like that? Warriors were as human as the rest were. Warriors lied. Some better than the others. When his little kitty still didn't say anything, he said finally, "You should think this through first." "I am thinking this through. He wants to be my consort. You do not." "It's not like that, damn it." He hadn't meant to shout, but he did anyway. Fuck. He was sure there were still guards outside her room, and that meant they heard every word. He hated making a scene. The Moretti pack was already involved in too many scenes as it was. His pack didn't need one fucking more. Then what is it about? Calys was shouting too, and her body shook with each word. The question hung in the air, but Alejandro knew he would not be able to answer it. She might not have any problems letting him see how much control he had over her, but Alejandro knew he would not be able to do the same for her. This smacked too much of the same shit that his older brother went through with his own human wife, and Alejandro didn't want that. He had known Calys for 2 days. 2 goddamn days, and the connection between them was already too strong and powerful. Alejandro could only imagine how much stronger their feelings would grow once they've known each other longer. How much more would he want his little kitty if her body also belonged to him? How hard would he fall if he became her consort? "I can only be your cavalier, little kitty. Take it as you will." The sound of a door slamming made him look up, but it was the scent of unshed tears that was his answer. Calys. Tension filled the throne room of our keep when the iron doors were pulled open by the stewards and Pasquale strode in. Of average height, he was one of the few shifters who did not seem to have ever experienced bloodlust. Ever. Since we were kids, Pasquale had always stood apart. When we played battle games, he had always opted to stay behind, preferring to strategize rather than charging into a fight. Maybe this was destiny, I told myself. I was his exact opposite. Actually, he was the exact opposite of Alejandro Moretti too. He could serve as a calming influence over me in a way that the Moretti prince could never do. Pasquale was formally attired, and it made me flush in realization that I was once again vastly underdressed. Even Alejandro, despite not having any change of clothes with him, looked more authoritative than I was. The thought of Alejandro had me biting my lip, but I valiantly resisted the urge to look at him. He had insisted on being with me during this meeting. He had made his demand in front of all the other Adelardi pack warriors, and not one of them had blinked. In fact, they were already treating him like my right hand, like my cavalier. The ease with which he took command of my men made me foolishly want to cry. Couldn't he see how it would be if he was my consort? Instead, I came to my feet and walked towards Pasquale, meeting him halfway. "Thank you for coming so quickly," I told him with a smile as I offered my hand to shake. But instead of shaking it, Pasquale brought it to his lips, making me start in surprise. Behind me, I could literally feel Alejandro's cold, deadly gaze sharpening towards us. I could feel his lichen half bristling like a wolf ready to attack. When he released my hand, he murmured, "Thank you for the privilege of your prompt response, princess." His dark brown eyes moved to Alejandro. "Is he Stefano's replacement?" "No." I softened my answer with another smile, but I was determined not to entertain questions I did not like answering. He was not my consort yet. Didn't owe him any answers. "Your father and Stefano? Are they well?" "They have been called away on pack business. I expect them to return within the week." Adelardi pack business was nobody's business but us Adelardis. Shall we proceed to the dining hall and have refreshments served while we talk? Pasquale was silent for a moment before he answered. If it does not displease you, princess, I would prefer we talk about my proposal in a straightforward manner. I have stated everything in the missive I sent to your father. Have you read it? Stefan has passed the missive to me, yes. And do you approve? I have certain conditions that I hope you will agree to, but other than that, yes, your proposal to merge our packs in one shared leadership between us is to my liking. Pasquale gestured for me to continue. State your conditions then. If they are not unreasonable, I will gladly agree to them. Looking at him and no one else, I said, the first is that I will have Alejandro Moretti as my cavalier, and I shall maintain his services even after we are married. Pasquale's tone sharpened as he asked, why would you need a cavalier when you already have me? He is apparently the only one who can talk sense to me when I have one of my dark fits. Like all other panthers, Pasquale knew what I was, but unlike the others, he at least had not called me the human monster to my face. And why is that? The reason does not matter to me. He has already proven on 2 occasions that he is able to control me even in one of my dark fits. Such skills are of vital importance as in time, it may allow me to use my own skills for the good of the pack. I will not lie to you, princess. I don't like you having a cavalier. As sure to cause talk, but that can be handled. For a moment Pasquale's disdain for Alejandro showed on his face. I know the likes of him. Being a younger son, he has no place in the Morettis. I suppose he thinks ingratiating himself to you will give him a chance to achieve a higher pack position. I knew that wasn't true. Whatever Alejandro Moretti was, he wasn't like that. But I hardened my heart. Even though I knew it was wrong, I just couldn't make myself speak. I wanted him to hurt as much as he had hurt me. Pasquale was visibly pleased when I did not protest his insinuations. He practically strutted as he came close to Alejandro, forcing me to turn around. Alejandro's gaze was inscrutable, his face bland, but there was a muscle ticking in his jaw. It was obvious Pasquale's words had hit a raw spot. Do you swear you will serve my princess faithfully, cavalier? He smirked. Or should I call you dog? My head whipped around. Pasquale! I was aghast at the term. It was the lowest insult one could give to a werewolf. Crap. This had totally backfired on me. I wanted him to be in pain, but I didn't want him humiliated this way. Alejandro, the rest of my words died at his look. I knew then and there he believed Pasquale and that he hated me for it. But more than that, there was pain in his eyes that broke my heart. One day in the near future I would find out just what that term meant to Alejandro, and it would break my heart all over again. In that moment I didn't care about how much he had hurt me by refusing to be my consort. All I wanted was to heal the pain. Alejandro. But he cut me off. Without looking at me, Alejandro murmured to Pasquale, I will be faithful for as long as the princess requires my services. Pasquale left a few minutes later, claiming a prior engagement he had to attend to. When the doors closed behind Pasquale and the guards left Alejandro and me alone, I tried to work up the courage to apologize to him. I was miserable and upset. I hadn't meant for that to happen. I never wanted him to be called a dog. He would believe me, right? Surely he knew that I would never want him to suffer so because my head shot up, my face paling. I loved him. Oh God, I loved him. I couldn't understand how such a powerful emotion could come into being in so short a time, but it had happened. I loved him. I loved him with all my heart. Princess. Yes. And that was my only warning. In moments he had me up against the wall and I didn't even think of refusing his kiss. I wrapped my arms and legs around him, feeling like this was the best place I could ever be in my life. He kissed me hard and I kissed him back just as fiercely. When he pulled away, I opened my mouth to tell him I was sorry, to tell him that I would break my promise to take Pasquale as a consort. I wanted to tell him that I loved him, but all the words died at the cold look in his eyes. I will fight your battles with you, princess, and for you. I will lead your army and make them the mightiest in the land. Your foes shall rue the day they ever cross swords with you. Every shifter shall know that you are my princess and I am your cavalier, sworn to obey your every word. I held my breath, knowing that there was more. But when we are alone, princess, it will be the other way around. When we are alone, I shall be your master and you will be my slave, sworn to obey my every word. His smile was feral. If I want you to take me in your mouth, you're going to take it and you're going to ask me how many times I want to come in your mouth. If I want to fuck you like a dog, you're going to let me. Why are you talking to me like this? Cried out. Can't I fuck you like a dog? After all, that's what you really think of me. Don't you? That's why you thought I'd make a good cavalier. No, it's not. Don't bother lying, Alejandro snapped. A bitter smile slashed his lips. There's no shame in speaking the truth. After all, warriors like you and me, we don't lie, do we? I couldn't answer. How ironic that it was when he was telling the truth I realized I was wrong. Warriors lied, and they could lie to themselves the way I had done. I was soon to secure my inheritance as pack leader, and I had the strongest warrior at my side. It was everything I had dreamed of, but my future had never seemed bleaker, knowing that Alejandro now hated me as much as I loved him. I'm sorry, I whispered. I never. My voice trailed off. He would never believe me now. I should have spoken up earlier, but I hadn't, and now I had to pay the price for lying. I knew I wasn't the only one at fault, but that didn't matter. He had hurt me, and I had lashed back only to realize too late that by hurting him I would only hurt myself more. I'm just so sorry. It was the only thing I could say. I'm sure you are, little kitty. His voice was softly mocking. But I will make you sorrier in the next few days. Be assured of it. Part 2. Chapter 2. Alejandro. All noise inside the well-appointed conference room came to a halt when Calys entered, her bearing regal. Her blonde hair was combed straight, her deep blue velvet gown just the slightest bit wrinkled. She didn't smell like him, which was a pity, but Alejandro had been the one to make certain of it. There were less than 30 of them inside the room, with only Stefano and Alejandro, not belonging to the Hernandez pack. Standing at the back of the room, Alejandro was able to observe the panthers around him, and what he saw made him wary and vigilant. Calys' appearance seemed to have made half the Hernandez panthers uneasy. The other half appeared furious, as if itching for a fight. He glanced at Stefano. Where are your men? Stefano answered reluctantly. It's only me. Fuck. Alejandro didn't like this. The numbers were too skewed, even if he had Hulk Barbie by his side. Calys had finally reached her fiancé's side. Pasquale was smiling down at her, saying, I was worried about you, princess. Alejandro despised the possessive tone of the Hernandez heir. It made him want to punch Pasquale in the face. Pasquale drew Calys close to him, his hand settling against her hip. Alejandro had never seen him being this touchy with Calys before, not even during their own damn engagement party. It was disturbing. If all this touchy-feely shit was supposed to make Alejandro jealous, the Panther Prince was definitely doing a great job of it. Why are we meeting here? Pasquale's face turned grave. I am afraid we have unfortunate news, princess. He tapped the table in front of him and Calys looked down. The table had a digital display showing the map of the state. One of the marked territories was the Adelardi pack's stronghold in the north. Calys sucked in a quick breath at the sight of it. What happened? We found out that your cousin Raul has planned an ambush. Alejandro's gaze met Stefano's. The Adelardi pack leader's right-hand man had an unreadable expression on his too angelic face, but he sensed Stefano feeling the same skepticism about the news. An ambush? Targeting whom? Calys asked. Pasquale answered simply. You. Her eyes widened. Me. You are the only one standing in his way to the throne, your highness. This. From one of the Hernandez nobles, his tone contemptuous, making it sound like Calys was an idiot for being surprised. Calys didn't even blink, didn't even seem to care about the slur that was directed her way. But Alejandro did. In a second, Alejandro had the man against the wall, his fingers wrapped around the noble's throat. Alejandro. Alejandro didn't understand Calys' shock. It was as if she hadn't expected him to come to her defense. Looking at the man he held by the neck, he said grimly, apologize to the princess. The air in the room was rife with tension, influenced by the aura of danger surrounding Alejandro. Release my man, but Pasquale's voice died down when he caught a glimpse of the cold fury glinting in the werewolf's eyes. Damn it, why did this lichen care so much about Calys? The Moretti prince was the only blight in his horizon, an unpredictable factor that made Pasquale leery of making any unplanned move. I mean, you no offense, Prince, the tone rather than the words had Pasquale's teeth gnashing. The Lycan's voice was polite but bland, making it clear he didn't really give a shit about what Pasquale said or not. But I only owe loyalty to the princess, Alejandro finished. He waited for Pasquale to argue. Privately, he hoped that the other prince would argue. He did, then Alejandro would have the right to kick his. Pasquale looked at Stefano. Are you not going to reprimand him? Alejandro was disappointed. Stefano shrugged. As the wolf said, he is only under the princess' command. Humiliated fury turned Pasquale's cheeks ruddy. Damn jaguar. He should have known he wouldn't get any support from the bastard. Once Calys was his wife, and he had her under his thumb, Pasquale would make the Gittiselli byblow. Hey. Summoning a smile, Pasquale said to Calys, surely you would at least side with me on this, my princess. Calys. The look on my fiancé's face made it obvious what he expected me to say. I bit my lip, trying to think of the best way to resolve the situation. Stefano and I were used to the insults that were directed my way, but I should have thought of warning Alejandro about it. Calys, my dear? Pasquale was beginning to sound testy. Before I could answer, we heard a yelp of pain, and I winced in horror when I saw Alessandro extending his arm, effortlessly carrying the man's weight as he pushed the panther further up against the wall. Alejandro, I protested. His head might. Are you going to apologize? Alejandro asked. The man spit at my cavalier. Alejandro's arm shot straight up, and this time his captive's head did hit the ceiling. Repeatedly. There was no change in Alejandro's expression as he hammered the ceiling with the panther's head. What are you doing? Pasquale shouted, making no move to help his pack member. Is it not obvious, Prince? Alejandro hit the ceiling with greater force, causing the man's temple to start bleeding. There, he said in a very helpful manner. Is it obvious now, Your Highness? I was torn between horror and amusement. Maybe I really was a human monster. But I just couldn't make myself feel sympathetic for the panther Alejandro was currently treating like a jackhammer. I had never done him any harm, but like most shifters, he had hated me on sight. Pasquale stalked towards Alejandro and struck him from the back. I gasped. Pasquale! Without thinking, I moved towards them as well, but Stefano was suddenly there, holding me back. Stefano said in a low, grim voice, Stay, princess. He cannot be your cavalier if it's you who comes to his defense. Knowing Stefano was right, I tried to appeal to Pasquale instead. He had never been this confrontational, so I couldn't get why he was being so antagonistic. Pasquale, please don't. But it was as if he didn't hear me. There was a twisted look of satisfaction on Pasquale's face as he looked around him and saw all his men. He had the numbers on his side, giving him a sense of false bravado. Pasquale shoved Alejandro from behind. Let him go. Another hard, taunting shove. Alejandro stiffened, and the air around us suddenly became heavier. Stefano muttered under his breath, Your fiancé has it coming now. Pasquale didn't seem to know it. Damn you, let him go, D. Without letting go or stopping his hammering, Alejandro's head slowly turned to face my fiancé. If he wasn't mad before, he was now. Before you finish what you're saying, Prince. My cavalier's voice lowered, turning his next words into a threat. You need to remember one important thing. Is that so? Pasquale sneered, but his voice shook in the end. Yes. A smile slashed across Alejandro's lips. You are in my city, my territory, so if you think having this paltry few will keep you alive, think again. This hotel is surrounded by Moretti wolves. Right this very moment. They're all around us. Outside our door, on top of us, below us. They're everywhere. My head snapped to Stefano, but he didn't seem surprised. He must have sniffed out their presence well before now, and it just showed how ill-trained Pasquale's pack was. I looked back at the panthers and saw the same truth dawning on their faces as fear filled their gazes. How many? I mouthed the question to Stefano. Dozens? Scores? Stefano shook his head. Hundreds. My jaw dropped. Alejandro's voice became silky. You were saying, Prince? Pasquale's face was white with humiliation, but it was clear Alejandro wouldn't let him go so easily. Behind him, one of the older panthers said nervously, Your Highness, we wouldn't want a war on our hands with the Morettis. It was true. No Saint Alpha would want a war with the Morettis. The Lichen Pack. Alpha's heir might be persona non grata right now, but it didn't mean the Morettis were poorer or weaker than they were before. If the periodic reports my father commissioned were correct, the Morettis had one of the strongest shifter armies in the world. Alejandro said mockingly. Your Highness. He dropped the man he was holding, as if finding him no longer interesting. The panther fell to the floor and curled into a ball. His pack members rushed towards him, exclaiming over the huge bleeding bump on top of his head. Prince Pasquale? Alejandro was slowly and steadily walking towards my fiancé, while the panther prince backed away. Stop. I command you to stop. Pasquale was clearly freaking out. Alejandro didn't. I'm truly interested in what you had to say earlier. What was it? Damn you, let him go. He lifted his hand. Pasquale's eyes widened and he yelled, Dugong. Silence fell. Alejandro's hand froze in the air. Slowly I covered my mouth. Dugong. Like the cousin of the manatee, heavy, slow-moving creature that was so ugly it was considered terribly cute? Stefano just as slowly looked at the ceiling, as if suddenly finding it fascinating. In my mind I was imagining Pasquale saying those very words. Damn you, let him go, Dugong. Oh God, was that better or worse calling a lichen royal like Alejandro Moretti Dugong? Did Dugong shifters even exist? I looked at Alejandro, and again the words replayed in my mind. Damn you, let him go, Dugong. I tightened my hold over my mouth. Dear God, please do not let me laugh. Alejandro. Alejandro bent over the sink and splashed cold water on his face several times, hoping it would work like a dose of reality. He had always prided himself for being able to keep his cool. Unlike his twin Alessandro, he preferred to be more subtle when fighting. Or at least he used to be all that. Before Calys came into his life. Switching the tap off, he straightened and glared at his reflection on the mirror. What the fuck are you doing, Alejandro Moretti? He had sworn to himself he would no longer be emotionally involved in any way with Calys Adelardi, but no, he had done the opposite earlier. He came to her defense even knowing she didn't really need it, and ended up adding Pasquale Hernandez to the already long list of enemies of his pack. His phone rang, the screen showing his older brother's name. Domenico, he greeted. Alejandro. I'm sure you know why I called. Even though the heir to the Moretti pack's tone was lazy, Alejandro could still feel himself flushing. Only Domenico had the knack of making him and his twin feel like they were adolescent boys again. Alejandro tried to sound blasé. I have no idea what you mean, brother. The last time you were here, you told me you were just trying to cure your boredom, and that's why you became the Princess Cavalier. But now I'm receiving reports that you've just made an enemy out of the Hernandez pack. When Alejandro didn't say anything, Domenico continued in a sober voice. I know you don't want to hear this, but you will hear it anyway. You and I both know the princess means more to you than you're willing to admit. Alejandro's jaw clenched. Let's just put it this way. Your wife was nice, but look what happened. My princess? She isn't half as nice as Misty is. So we're better off this way. There was a moment of silence before Domenico spoke again. No, you're not. But I think you have to learn that the hard way. His voice turned brisk. Just take care of yourself. Hernandez may seem like a wimp, but I've always considered him cunning. He would never have maintained his position among the Panthera if he wasn't. Understood. I appreciate the warning. Ending the call, Alejandro was about to leave the restroom when he heard voices outside the hotel's men's room. He recognized the voices immediately and he stopped, his hand falling from the doorknob. Be serious, princess. It was Stefano, his voice a mixture of exasperation and anger. I am being serious, and that's why I am commanding you to go back to our den and stand guard. I have the rest of Pasquale's pack with me. This was Calys, her tone adamant. Alejandro grimaced. He knew that tone. When his Hellcat used it, there would be no way of getting around her. Do not be so stubborn. I'm not. Stefano cursed under his breath. I just don't like this. Your cousin has never acted so openly against your father. It's not in his character. People change. You know it's true. Alejandro stiffened at the way Calys spoke. There was something she wasn't saying, something that made her very emotional. Stefano said in a low voice. If you are talking again about... Yes, you know I am. And that's why I am giving you this order as heir to the... Alpha. Go back to the den and stand guard. A beat of silence, and then Stefano said, Yes, Your Highness. Thank you. I'll go back to Pasquale's side now. If you see Alejandro, please let him know we'll be leaving tonight for the north. When Calys left, Alejandro opened the door and came out. He was absolutely certain Stefano had detected his presence, so why not tell Calys about it? The blonde jaguar didn't even blink as their eyes met. He was on the phone, and Alejandro's eyebrow lifted in surprise when Stefano started to speak. I'm heading your way. Shut every window in your room, lock the door, and don't come out no matter what. His voice was fiercely protective. After a moment, Stefano hissed, No arguments. Do you understand? When Stefano was finished with the call, Alejandro blocked his way before the jaguar could even attempt to leave. What exactly is there between you and Calys? Stefano's stoic face didn't change. I don't believe you're in the position to ask that. Does she know? He bit out. Know what? His eyes bored through Stefano's. About the other woman in your life. That's not for me to discuss with you. However, if you may, I would like to ask you for a favor. As you have heard, the princess has ordered me to leave her side. I can only rely on you to protect her. Stefano paused. You are an honorable man, Moretti, so I hope I am not doing the wrong thing by trusting you to do your duty. She only has you to protect